As you already know, the Fate Foundation and its research arm, the Fate Institute, have released two important reports on critical sectors of Nigeria's economy. Now, this is a report we discussed yesterday, in case you missed. No, actually, we didn't discuss this one, but this is one of them. The industrial sector of Nigeria, basically beyond the hustle, Nigeria's industrial awakening. The other, which we dove into with the director of the Fate Institute, Amaka Nwakolo, was the entrepreneurship report for 2025. So I mean, we lightly touched on this, but now we're going to get into the weeds with economist Wilson Erumebor, who of course is the Alumnus Fellow at the Fate Institute. He's also the principal economist at the NESG. Wilson, it's good to see you again.
Yeah, great
I
to
haven't
be here.
seen you in a while. You've been a busy man. Look, so you gave a presentation on this particular report, and I wanted to start with the why, because there's two charts that you all laid out here as to the declining portion of exports that are attributable to manufacturing, and essentially, why that is struggling. So we'll get those charts up any moment now, but I guess perfect. So manufacturing output as a share of GDP, that of course declining, and then also the share of exports, right? Why is that the case? Let's start with the why.
The simple answer is we don't know how to produce competitively and in a large scale. So if you take out oil from our exports and take out oil from our GDP, so you have non-oil export and non-oil GDP, the share of non-oil GDP that we export is just around 5%. So it tells you that even in terms of servicing the export market, we're still struggling. And if you look at it from a firm level, most of our large firms, whether it's the firms in the manufacturing sector generally, just go through their books. Before I came here, I did for Unilever, for instance. Their revenue was somewhere around 140, 149 billion. Yeah. Right? How much of that is attributable to export sales? Just 3%. Right. You do the same for other companies, even though they are, recently trying to see how they can upscale that export part. But the attention has always been the domestic market. And it's part of the reason why anytime there's problems with FX, weaker currency, in fact, our manufacturing firms are amongst the first to cry out. Why? Because they don't export as much as they should. And so at the local level, you would see that most of our manufacturing firms are very small. So we have so many nano, micro firms. So during my PhD research, one of the things that came out strongly, and in fact, I had to define a concept of subsistence manufacturing. The way we have subsistence agriculture where, people just do things in their backyard to feed their families, grow food just for the household and the local market. Yeah. And you see that kind of characteristics within Nigeria's manufacturing sector where over 91% of manufacturing firms operate at the subsistence level. And in fact, if you look at the numbers in terms of employment, 73% of workers in the sector are self-employed. So you just basically have one-man business type manufacturing outfit where someone is just making shoes, making bags, and very small micro manufacturing. And interestingly or sadly, that's not the kind of manufacturing that will lift people out of poverty or move Nigeria to the next stage of development. Yeah. So there are a whole lot of factors which I believe we'll talk about in terms of finance, exchange rates, and all of the other structural bottlenecks that we face. Yeah,
there's supposed to be another chart of manufacturing being, as you just mentioned, being below 3% of total goods exported. But let's get to the plans. There it is. All right, shout out to our team in the gallery. So that's what you just explained now. But there's also, you listed the plan, the report has listed out prior plans that different governments, different administrations have used to try to address, right? Yeah. So, post-independence National Development Plan. You had 1980s to the 90s, Structural Adjustment Rolling Plans. 1999, 2007, the needs and the seeds, backward integration. 2009, 2014, Vision 2020, 2017 to 2020, Economic Recovery and Growth Plan. 2021 to 25, Medium-Term National Development Plan. We got a renewed Hope Plan now. Why haven't all these worked?
Well, there are many reasons, but one of them is, execution. As we always say, Nigeria is good at planning, but when it comes to execution, I think that's where we often struggle. But one thing is very clear, and in fact, these are just the few. There are many more plans at the sectoral level that we've had that, in some cases, they're not implemented, as well as they should. But if you look through, you would see some in bold, right? The areas where we've made progress are cases where we're able to execute those plans, at maximum capacity. Backward integration policy for cement industry. Remember Akin Adesina, the ATA agenda. Nigeria had some progress in the agricultural sector then. So it tells you that, well, plans are important, but execution is even more important. And what's also striking for me, right? I'm not saying we need a plan regardless of whether, but we need to focus more on execution. So in the last industrial plan we've had, right, a comprehensive industrial plan in Nigeria, and we highlighted this in the report, was in 2014. This is over a decade ago.
Yeah.
And you can imagine the fact that industrial policy is back across the world. Even countries that used to believe in free markets, right now, they believe that, look, we have to support and protect our domestic firms. The US with Trump and his tariffs. Yeah. In fact, before Trump, Biden, the Inflation Reduction Act, and many other, incentives that aim to protect some of these domestic firms. So we're in an era where people are coming to terms with the fact that the market cannot just deliver progress. We have to support. The government has to play an important role in supporting domestic firms. And for us, so it's quite shocking that we're in a technology-driven era, but still we don't have a plan. We don't have an industrial plan. We hear that there's something coming up. There's something awaiting approval with the FEC, a national industrial policy, but we hope that that plan would speak to the needs of businesses, particularly that small micro businesses that that are operating at the subsistence level across the country.
Perfect. I want to ask you about the states. Yeah. If we talk about the nano, small, medium enterprise, the really tiny ones, right? You have another chart there where you talk about how they have been largely not been impacted. But is that, because I know policies are made at the federal level, but then they've got to be distilled through the states and local governments. So, this is perfect. Here we're looking at the breakdown of credit to the private sector and so on and so forth. So what about the role of states and so on?
So important, because again, we're learning and we're seeing from other countries that industrialization is, in a way, micro. It's not just macro. And in the report, one of the things we highlighted is that over the years, how we've approached industrialization is we tend to favor big-ticket investment projects where building export processing zones, building industrial parks. Those things are good, right? But at the same time, we shouldn't neglect the micro aspect of industrialization, which are the small businesses. And so what we found is that we have a few firms at the top, a few big firms at the top. We have millions of micro, small, survivalist firms at the bottom. And then there is a missing middle. And that, in fact, is the productive base, the connective tissue of industrialization, if you look at China, South Korea, and many other countries, because they are the ones that will support these large firms in terms of input and also pull up these small firms. And in fact, small firms can even grow to play that middle role, for industrialization. And for that to happen, it's not just the federal government. It's not just about federal policies. State governments need to have their own local industrial agenda. How are you supporting those small businesses in your state in terms of building their capacity to export? In fact, learning to produce, because I think that's one thing we don't know how to do in this country. How to fabricate something that is useful and productive, how to use technology, how to improve skills development, and finance, of course, is important. So I think what we've done is some of the most important things in our economy. We've handed it over to the agencies or institutions that are very weak. So take, for example, primary healthcare, primary education, things that local government should do. So important, but they're in the hands of institutions that are not well funded. Same thing with industrialization. When China was developing and the likes, you could see how the townships, those local municipal workers would carry their notes, go to factories, ask them, what do you need? How can we support you? What have you exported? How can we grow your capacity to employ, to create more jobs? And then that feeds back to policy. I think for us, we've missed that, So we always look at this big project, but if we must develop and if we must grow, there has to be that micro support from both local and state government to our businesses.
Now, you talked about that pyramid, and I think yes. we do have that where you were mentioning those large firms at the top, and then the missing middle, and yes. then the ones at the bottom. So is perfect. There it is. If we want to scale for those at the bottom, yeah. I really wanted to ask you about electricity, right? Because in fact, funny enough, we're just talking about electric vehicles in our prior segment. Affordable access to electricity, won't that play a massive role in what?
Oh, it will.
Yeah.
In fact, at the session a few days ago, it was discussed. We had a session on it where people who are working in the renewable space also came to share their experience. And what we've seen over the years, in fact, if you look at the last year numbers in terms of the top 5 problematic issues facing small businesses, last year electricity was number 2, like inadequate power supply. It was number 2. This year, it's number 5.
Yeah.
So access to finance has remained at the top, the most problematic factor. But what we found is that there's some improvement in electricity, but businesses are complaining about the cost.
Right.
And again, when we talk about competitiveness, cost is a big factor in that. So it's more about how can businesses have access to affordable electricity. And of course, people are exploring other options like renewables. How can you power factories with solar energy and other alternative energy? And in some of these businesses are even mentioning that the electricity from the grid is now almost like the alternative.
Right.
They're transitioning to renewable energies basically because of the cost over time. So I think that's also very important, and it begs the need for us to see how we can decentralize the power sector in a way that state government, like what we're seeing in Abia, perhaps Lagos and co, can come on board and provide that support to businesses. All
right, let's quickly run through your 5 pillars here, because you've got, it's not just about analyzing the problem, it's also about putting forward solutions as quickly as possible. So with the 5 pillars, you've got small firms at the center, productive infrastructure, financing and upgrading and firm upgrading, industrialized capabilities, AFCFT, institutional coordination. So these small firms at the center, getting them, that's the states. Is that always well, real quick?
Well, it has to do with the states, has to do with the federal, but the idea is in our industrial plan, industrial policy, we have to emphasize the importance of small firms.
Not just the big ones.
Not just the big ones.
Right.
And also in terms of cluster, all those necessary support, they have to be a priority. Rotu, we've dealt with macroeconomic instability in the last 2 years, but now we're moving into a phase where some of the numbers are improving. And we have a $1 trillion economy to achieve by 2030.
Yeah.
There is no way we can do that without industrialization or without creating jobs. Macroeconomic stability is the necessary condition, but then those small firms are the ones that will create the jobs, export to other countries and create value addition across board. That is the next level of growth and development that we should see. And so they have to be at the center of whatever we do.
Almost out of time, but the financing and the firm upgrading, because you mentioned access to finance is that number one thing. I mean, it's basically, it's money.
Yes.
Does much of this come down to money?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I know we've got debt issues. You've talked about debt and so on and so forth. Is there a path? Do you see a path to that financing being effective?
Well, I hope there will be a path, because again, if you look at the numbers, just 15% of BOI's loans to the private went to just small businesses. 1.2% of credit to the private sector only went to just small scale businesses. So it's a big problem. And what we're saying this time is, enough of all these announcing 100 billion funds for sectors, and at the end of the day, we don't see who get these monies. There has to be a comprehensive plan for financing, and financing has to link to firm upgrading. If you export more, you get XYZ. The more you produce, the more you are able to create jobs, the more you access funding that will help your business scale. But we can't industrialize with interest rate at 30%, right? That's one of the big issues as far as finance is concerned.
Great reports. There's so much more to get into, but we're out of time. Wilson Erumebor, we've got to have you back. Great stuff. Thank you so much to you, the Fate Foundation, Fate Institute, for putting this all together. Principal Economist at the NESG and also Fate Institute Alumnus Fellow, Wilson Erumebor. Dr. Wilson Erumebor, Economist, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate your time.